Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Today will be different because instead of dissecting the candidates speechifying, we'll focus on the campaigning within President Obama's State of the Union address, as well as the surprising GOP response by South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Both took aim at certain frontrunners who remain nameless.
And that's why we need to reject any politics that targets people because of race or religion.
Some people think that you have to be the loudest voice in the room to make a difference. That's just not true. Often the best thing we can do is turn down the volume. When the sound is quieter, you can actually hear what someone else is saying.
They didn't say Donald Trump or Ted Cruz, but maybe they didn't have to. In a few minutes, we'll analyze last night's rhetoric with the help of Jonathan Alter, who has written biographies of Obama and FDR. And later in the hour, we'll smash the myth of the lame duck presidency. But first, just who is most likely to deliver the next State of the Union message. Yes, time for the horse race. Two significant developments this week. First, from the Democrats, who are capturing headlines, as a CBS News New York Times poll shows there has been a recent surge in national support for Bernie Sanders. Just last month, Hillary Clinton held a 20-point lead nationally, but she now holds a mere 7-point advantage over the Vermont senator. According to this poll of likely voters, 48% across the country now support Clinton, while 41% are for Sanders. Part of the problem for Hillary, voters under 45 are favoring Sanders by a wide margin of 2-1. It's a trend that could continue to bolster Sanders' double-digit lead in New Hampshire and help him continue to close his single-digit deficit with Clinton in Iowa. Of course, Donald Trump was in the news once again after earning negative references in both the Democratic and Republican speeches last night. But then there's this. Less than 3 weeks before caucus goers make their voices heard in Iowa, the British wagering site Betfair reports that Donald Trump is now considered to be the favorite to win the Republican nomination. It's the first time we have seen this in the months we have been monitoring these wagering sites. Consistent with conventional political wisdom, at the time, through the fall, the site had been showing Trump's odds well behind establishment favorite Marco Rubio, who now falls into second place. It is also worth noting that the pool of cash being wagered on the GOP nomination outcome has grown to $1 million, leading us to believe that the odds are now factoring in more information and are likely more accurate than ever before. The president's approval rating is another barometer of the nation's mood this election year. Going into the State of the Union last night, Obama's approval-disapproval numbers were about the same and clearly illustrate the entrenched political divide on the many issues. According to that New York Times CBS News poll released yesterday, just 1 percentage point divides the numbers who approve versus disapprove of the president, with Obama's numbers shifting by little more than a few percentage points over the last year. Very stable. With previous presidents, the public was more in agreement at the beginning of their final year. Both Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton showed these big net positive numbers in the double digits, while George W. Bush fell out of favor by a factor of more than 2-1. Now, time to look more closely at last night's State of the Union message from that half-popular president. It had many themes, but central was Obama's call for the national unity that he could not achieve.
It's one of the few regrets of my presidency that the rancor and suspicion between the parties has gotten worse instead of better. I have no doubt a president with the gifts of Lincoln or Roosevelt might have better bridged the divide. And I guarantee I'll keep trying to be better so long as I hold this office.
Does that moment of humility and resolve open a window to what a lame duck Obama can do? Let's ask Jonathan Alter. Few journalists understand this president as well as he does. He's written The Promise, President Obama Year One, And more recently, the center holds Obama and his enemies. And Alter knows his presidential history. Among his works, The Defining Moment, FDR's 100 Days, and The Triumph of Hope. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be here.
So that regret that the president expressed, he didn't really seem to blame himself for it. He just expressed regret that there was as much polarization, and yet I thought the implication was he's only blaming Republicans. Did you hear it the same way?
No, I actually think that he was just expressing regret for what is his biggest failure. You know, he came into politics in 2004, into national politics at the Democratic Convention, where he said, there's no red America, there's no blue America, there's only a United States of America. And I wrote a cover story in Newsweek about him not that long afterward, where the cover line was "Seeing Purple," red and blue. He was going to try to be a president who bridged this gap, and he was very proud of the fact.
We're more red and blue than ever before.
More than ever. So he has failed on that. The question of why he failed is a complex one that historians, I think, will be trying to untangle for a while. And I would, if I apportioned blame, I'd put it about 90% on the Republicans and 10% on him.
What's the 10%?
Okay, so in my last book, I had a chapter called Missing the Schmooze Gene. So Barack Obama is very unlike other politicians in that he's not a needy individual. He didn't go into politics for that affirmation that you get when you're meeting other people and they're telling you how great you are. He doesn't actually care, as one of his top people told me a few years ago. He doesn't actually care what people think about him. He doesn't care whether you like him. He's not trying to win you over the way a Bill Clinton would. And he really doesn't like to schmooze. He'd rather play golf with his young subordinates than with members of Congress. He likes to hang out with his real friends, not fake Washington friends. Those are very admirable traits in a human being, not so useful in a president, because you want, part of his job description is to spend a lot of time schmoozing members of Congress and others who can do him some good, people in the business community and so forth.
So it was the original No Red America, No Blue America speech, what's the word? Not earnest? Was he just saying that because it worked and he really thinks and has thought all along that Democrats are from Mars and Republicans are from Venus?
No, not at all. Because his experience in Springfield when he was a state senator was he would play poker with members of the Republican leadership. One of them cut an ad for him when he ran for president, even though he's a Republican. When he got to the U.S. Senate, he prided himself. I remember talking to him about this when he was a senator, in his relationship with Tom Coburn, a very, very conservative Republican from Oklahoma. They worked together on legislation. When I asked him when he was running for president, what do you want to do? What would you bring to this? He said, I bring people together who don't agree and find common ground. Very deeply bound up in his vision of who he was. And so he's deeply disappointed that this didn't work out. Now he feels that the opportunity cost, to use the fancy economic term, the consequences of him not schmoozing more are minimal. And he actually said at a press conference once, I could play golf with John Boehner every weekend and it wouldn't have made any difference. And that's what he believes. It's impossible to prove one way or another. I think when it comes to Boehner, that he's probably right, that this is a guy who, when he became Speaker of the House, before he was sworn in, he went on 60 Minutes and he said that he didn't believe in compromise, that the Tea Party folks and the others who made him Speaker would say, as they eventually did, that he was a sellout if he spent time with Obama. Look at the heat that Chris Christie takes just for appearing with them on the podium and hugging him a little bit after Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah.
So
the internal dynamics of the Republican Party.
That wouldn't have changed if he had played golf with them. But at the margins, particularly with Democrats. So I'm thinking of this vote after the Newtown massacre, right? Something that was very, very important to Barack Obama. He had just had the most depressing, saddest day, worst day, he said, of his entire presidency when he goes to Newtown, and he sees these 6-year-olds stacked up like cordwood, and it really rips him apart. And he vows, even though he hasn't done much in his first term on guns, he vows that he's going to do something about this. And he falls just short, even though there's Republican co-sponsorship of the bill. Senator Toomey, a Republican of Pennsylvania, was a co-sponsor from a big pro-gun state. Why did he lose on that? Because he couldn't close the case with every Democrat. Why couldn't he close the case with any Democrat? One possible explanation for these Democrats: he didn't know them. They didn't know him.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand that personal relationships are the currency in Washington. So it was one less arrow in his quiver. It doesn't mean he hasn't been a very, very good president. Doesn't mean he hasn't gotten a lot more done than people realize on a lot of issues, which we can talk about. But on a couple that were very important to him, the lack of these personal relationships hurt him at the margins.
So when he cited in that clip Lincoln and FDR, who you wrote a book about, were they so much better at that?
No.
No?
No.
No?
So Lincoln, his opposition has seceded, basically. You know, he had an overwhelming Republican majority because most of the Democrats at that time were in the Confederacy, right? He had plenty of problems with Congress. You know, his wife spent too much on shopping trips to New York, and they held hearings on Mary Todd. You know, lots of problems with Congress, and he didn't really start succeeding more politically until the fall of 1864 when he was running for re-election, and he had some victories on the battlefield. It wasn't that he was such a great schmoozer with Congress. FDR, huge veto-proof Democratic majorities, and also some liberal Republicans. So, and as far as his relationship with conservative Republicans, he had none. And he made fun of them. Martin, Barton, and Fish. Remember that whole thing?
Yeah, it's possible that the biggest news last night was actually made in the little Republican response by South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, where she actually took out after her own party. You never see this in a Republican response to a Democratic State of the Union address. And here's a Nikki Haley clip. Listen for or watch for her reference to a particular Trump proposal.
Today, we live in a time of threats like few others in recent memory. During anxious times, it can be tempting to follow the siren call of the angriest voices. We must resist that temptation. No one who is willing to work hard, abide by our laws, and love our traditions should ever feel unwelcome in this country.
So the angriest voices could have been a shot at a number of them, but at the end there, nobody should ever be excluded from this country on the basis of race or religion. I don't think I've ever heard before a respondent to a State of the Union address from either party criticize openly the signature policy of the leading presidential candidate of their own party.
There was a lot interesting about this speech by Nikki Haley. First of all, it was good. And almost all of the previous responses to State of the Union by Democrats or Republicans have been bad television.
Ever.
Poised, well-delivered, substance, depth, very good speech. She went right at Trump, and the next morning on the Today Show, she confirmed to Matt Lauer that it was Trump that she was talking about. Why is she doing this? He's leading by a lot in South Carolina. She and a lot of other Republicans are worried about what can only be called a hostile takeover bid of their party. And they are trying to resist the barbarian who is trying to conquer their party. They don't believe he's a real conservative. They don't believe he's temperamentally suited to be president of the United States. They think that the things he says about immigrants and Muslims are bad for this country. They think that he doesn't tell the truth. All of those things, by the way, are true. And it's just a question of whether they can convince their Republican supporters and their constituents of this before it's too late.
In a minute, I'm going to play a clip of how Obama went after Ted Cruz by citing one of his lines in particular. But do you think Nikki Haley was sort of put up to it by the quote-unquote Republican establishment, whatever that is? This is supposed to be Trump's measure of whether he'll run as an independent if he doesn't get the nomination, if he's treated fairly by the Republican establishment. And is this the establishment whoever these mythical party bosses are, getting together and saying, hey, Nikki, will you do us a solid here and kind of rip Trump in the Republican response to the State of the Union?
I don't think it's that calculated. I mean, it's the leadership of the Congress that decides who will deliver the Republican response. So she was selected by Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell.
They're the Republican establishment.
Do they want to stop Trump? Yes. But, they also...
Did they get to vet her speech? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that question, probably, but they also aren't in the habit of, editing those speeches. They don't do that. They don't have that heavy hand, at least not in the past. Clearly somebody saw the speech in the Republican Party, but there is no, as Al Gore once said, there is no controlling legal authority. There is no control. They're in a chaotic situation. They know that she's a very bright light in the party, and that by giving her a platform, maybe they can figure out how to get a little bit more control over this process if an establishment candidate emerges. But there's a real question as to whether the Republican Party establishment is essentially dead. I mean, its performance this year, despite spending tens of millions of dollars, they've got nothing for it. And the mood of the party is just different, in a different place.
I heard Rush Limbaugh say just today that the Koch brothers have been complaining that all the money they're spending this year is kind of for naught. They feel like they have less influence, all poor Koch brothers, over the Republican nomination process than they've ever had before.
That's the only good thing about Donald Trump. That's it.
And, Limbaugh, again, this is from Limbaugh's point of view, but that the Republican Party establishment is more out of touch with the voters of its own party than he's ever seen it before.
Right, because the voters are not bankers. I think in 2012, the Republican establishment thought that everybody in their party was like owned a small business, and they didn't get that they needed to broaden the base of their party. Then after the election, they sort of pretended like they wanted to broaden the base of their party, but they didn't. Yeah. And they also missed the depth of the anger, particularly on immigration. They just misread the politics of it.
And the latest YouGov poll, I heard, shows that if some of these mainstream candidates were to drop out, proportionately, Trump would get the voters they leave behind. There's been an assumption that he's got a ceiling that'll never go up.
Right.
But that may be changing.
I mean, he does amazingly well with
that prominent.
He does amazingly well with evangelicals. I mean, this is a guy who says, "The wafer tasted good, and I think I'm a Presbyterian, and I've been divorced
transcends that
2 or 3 times." But
Ted Cruz,
nobody cares.
Can't discount Ted Cruz.
Right.
And the president chose to go after him specifically in the State of the Union yesterday, not by name, but watch this clip where he refers to something that Cruz said about how he would get ISIS.
The world will look to us to help solve these problems. And our answer needs to be more than tough talk or calls to carpet bomb civilians. That may work as a TV soundbite, but it doesn't pass muster on the world stage.
Cruz had said he would carpet bomb ISIS back to oblivion and see if sand glows in the dark, which sounds creepily like he's actually threatening nuclear war. And he's the number 2 candidate in the Republican Party at the moment.
And has a very good chance at the nomination also because he's much more in tune with the base of the Republican Party than Donald Trump is. And it might be that over time, the base goes, I dated Trump, but I want to marry Cruz because he's much more in accord with our thinking on a wide variety of political issues.
And yet he's so angry and apocalyptic and divisive that until Trump came along, the party leadership was afraid of him getting the nomination because he's unelectable.
And he's a jerk. Both these guys are jerks. This is the thing. There's no other word for them. I mean, there's another word, but I probably can't use it on television.
Even jerk. You're very direct.
And this is not, my opinion that they're jerks. It's everybody in the Senate despises Cruz. People who know Trump in New York think that he's a blowhard jerk, and you can tell by their public statements as well. But it's important sometimes to people and politicians in private something I can do. What do they really think of this guy as a person, not their politics?
Yeah.
So there are people who are much more conservative than Ted Cruz, who are very well liked by other politicians
Right.
because they're not jerks. Cruz is a jerk.
Stay there.
Yeah.
We're going to have some more thoughts from you after we bring on some additional evidence. Time for evidence-based politics, where we meet a scholar who has studied an issue oversimplified by campaign rhetoric. The term lame duck has been floating around in the rhetorical pond way before Obama stepped into his second-term presidency with a Republican Congress, with no incentive for re-election, political capital spent, and little time left. The idea goes the second-term president's energy and effectiveness fizzles out. But does this cliche stand the test of history? We go to a scholar whose book on the question concludes that lame duck presidencies are not all they're, forgive me, quacked up to be. On Skype from Radnor, Pennsylvania, James Hetke, professor of history and political science at Cabrini College. He's the author of Lame Duck Presidents, Myth or Reality. Welcome.
Brian, thank you for having me on the show, and I've certainly enjoyed Jonathan's analysis.
Where'd the term come from?
The lame duck term actually comes from the 18th century, and it was used to describe individuals who were in debt and couldn't pay their debt back. It was also used to describe people who had failed in the stock market. We first see its use about 1806 with Senator Plummer from New Hampshire, who was commenting on the what he thought was the stupidity of Jefferson, announcing that he wasn't going to run for a third term in office.
In the modern era, let's say from maybe FDR on, who's been the lamest lame duck and who's transcended it?
Lamest lame duck probably was George Bush. And if we look at George W. Bush, we see that his approval rating fell from in the start of his second term from 50% to 25%. He was pretty much shackled with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that turned somewhat unpopular on him. And then, of course, the catastrophic downturn in the American economy.
And how about the least lame? Who's gotten the most done?
The least lame is a person probably that I think will surprise you. And I'm going to say Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton left office in 2001, but in 1999, 2000, he actually had his highest congressional approval score of 55.1%, which is his highest with the 6 years of the Republican Congress. And he also left with one of the highest approval ratings of any modern president.
So Obama, with his divided approval ratings, people are kind of 50-50 on him right now. What kind of lame duck year do you see him setting himself up for?
I think that Barack Obama is going to continue to use the powers of command. Richard Pius, the great presidential scholarship, talks about the power to command. And the power to command really lies with executive orders. It lies with using the veto and using the executive agreement. I would really agree with Jonathan Alter that this president lacks the schmoozing power, so he can't really use the power to persuade anymore. So I would see the powers of command to be his best alternative to continue his legacy.
Jonathan, following Obama as closely as you do and having written a book on FDR, how do you see this?
Yeah, I think that sounds right. The thing that none of us can predict is, comes from the great line from Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is, events are in the saddle and tend to ride mankind. So a lot of being president is reacting to events, and events can take a lot of different shapes in a 12-month period. I mean, I got the sense this week that we might be in skirmishes with Iran before 2016 is over.
But they return those sailors.
They returned the sailors, but they needed to return the sailors in order to get the money, right? Once they deposit
From the arms
the
deal.
$100 billion, they no longer have a strong incentive to return sailors that they've seized. And you could see this happening again, and then because the Revolutionary Guard in Iran is so angry about this nuclear deal and has a lot of power within Iranian society, you could see them staging something like this again. Or there could be many other things that take place in various parts of the world that are very hard to predict. And so part of Obama's legacy will depend on how he reacts, this year.
But Professor, as you indicated, the president is trying to use his executive authority aggressively to shape the lame duck year. Is it historically, to an outlier degree? Obama's taking so much heat from the Republicans for, being a dictator, using his executive authority unilaterally, excessively. Is it unusual during a lame duck year if that's all the president has left?
Absolutely not. In fact, the Republicans are being quite disingenuous with that particular claim. If we looked at Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush, we'd see the same exercise of command powers in terms of executive orders, executive agreements, and vetoes, especially in that last year in office.
So is the idea of a lame duck a myth?
The idea of a lame duck president is a myth quantitatively. And I say quantitatively because the independent variables that determine whether or not a president's going to be successful in his last 2 to 4 years are whether or not Congress is of his party. And as Jonathan rightfully pointed out, the exogenous events that are occurring in the nation and around the world.
Professor, could I ask you something about this? Because it almost seems
real
to me...
quick, because we have 30 seconds
on
the
okay.
show. So quick question.
Sometimes they get more done in a lame duck session of Congress, and in Obama's case as well, where they've been very legislatively productive after the election and before the new year begins.
Professor,
right?
15 seconds.
I would agree, Jonathan, because both... We just think that it's Barack Obama who wants a legacy. Congress also needs something to run on in 2016.
Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian.
And that is POTUS 2016 for this week. We are here every week at this hour calling the presidential horse race and throwing cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. 19 days to Iowa, 27 to New Hampshire. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.